All right, I will call this meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee to order. It is Friday, May 14th, 2021. It is deadline day, and it's very nice to see so many people here in person. Will the esteemed secretary please call the roll?
Vice Chair Cannizzaro? Senator Orenshaw?
Here.
Senator Harris?
Here.
Senator Settlemyre? Here. Senator Hansen? Here. Senator Pickard? Here. Chair Scheibel?
Here. And for the benefit of everybody who is following along, everybody who is here, it's currently 2:45 p.m. My plan is to do part of the work session now. We have combined about 5 bills into a consent calendar, so that should only take us a few minutes. Then we will go to the hearing on AB 396. After the hearing on AB 396, we will probably take a short break so that the committee can see if we have some more items to put on a second consent calendar, and then we will continue with our work session after the hearing. As always, we appreciate your patience in ensuring that we get all the good work done that we need to do here in this building, both in Senate Judiciary and everywhere else. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Guinan to start us off with the work session.
Thanks, Chair Scheibel. For the record, Patrick Guinan, Committee Policy Analyst. As the Chair mentioned, we have a consent calendar that we're going to do quickly. If you're looking at the consent calendar, some of the bills are not going to be on it, so I'll read very quickly what they are. The consent calendar right now is going to be AB 107, which revises the procedure for determining whether a person may prosecute or defend a civil action without paying costs. AB 112, which revises provisions relating to compromise claims of a minor. AB 113, which increases the limitation of time within which a criminal prosecution for sex trafficking must be commenced. AB 145, which adopts the Uniform Registration of Canadian Money Judgments Act, and AB 318, which makes various provisions relating to estates. So those bills are the consent calendar. There are no amendments on them, so the motion would be a do pass. And that's it, Chair. Thank you.
All right, any questions, comments? A motion from Senator Orenshaw.
So moved.
All right, Senator Orenshaw moves to pass. Vice Chair Cannizzaro seconds the motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we do have one member participating remotely today, so I will ask for a roll call vote for clarity on the record.
Vice Chair Cannizzaro? Senator Orenshaw?
Yes.
Senator Harris?
Yes.
Senator Settlemyre? Yes. Senator Hansen?
Yes.
Senator Pickard?
Yes.
Chair Scheibel?
Yes. And with that, the consent calendar passes. All of those motions to do pass those bills pass. I will go ahead and assign floor statements right now. Any volunteers for AB 107? All right, Senator Pickard, it's yours. Any volunteers for AB 112? Senator Hansen, it's yours. Any volunteers for AB 113? Senator Hansen, it's yours. Wait, who said me, me, me? Oh, sorry, Senator Settlemyre, it's yours. AB 145. All right, Senator Orenshaw. And 318, Senator Cannizzaro. Is that everything, Mr. Guinan? All right. That concludes our work session for now. There will be more to come later, so you all have that to look forward to. And now I will open up the hearing on AB 396.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My name is Chandra Summers Armstrong, Assemblywoman for Assembly District 6. I appreciate you all placing this item on your agenda for hearing, and I appreciate your time and attention to this very important matter. Today I come before you with Assembly Bill 396. I appreciate that our Assembly Judiciary Chair Mr. Yeager was kind enough to ask me to present this bill in the Assembly, and I bring it before you today for hearing. Assembly Bill 396 is very simple and straightforward. It does a couple of things. One, it clarifies in NRS 200.140 that when there is when homicide is justifiable when committed by a police officer or a peace officer, that language is clarified, that it is not the public, but that it is a peace officer. And that is in section 1.1, and it clarifies that it is peace officer. B, the language there clarifies that the homicide results from the use of deadly force by the peace officer in accordance with NRS 171.1455. And also, it makes consistent the use of peace officer throughout the section. Additionally, there's a change to NRS 171.1455, section 1. If the person is being apprehended, we want some clarity here. Oh, I'm so nervous, just bear with me. We want to make sure that the person who is being apprehended, and if there is a need for deadly force, that it is only in the instance of serious bodily harm or the use of force, and that the person who they are trying to apprehend is an imminent threat of bodily harm to said peace officer or others in the vicinity. This is really critical language from my perspective. We've had instances, and they are well documented, where we've had folks who are being apprehended, who are running away from, who may be restrained, who may not have a weapon, who have been where bodily harm and homicide has happened, and I don't think homicide is the right word, deadly force has been used. And I think that it is really important that we make a distinction that whoever is being apprehended causes and is an imminent danger to the police officer who is conducting the extraction or is arresting someone, and that person is just not running away from the police, and that they are a threat to someone else before deadly force is used. With me today is Mr. Ishman. He was also present at the Assembly hearing. I'm sure I did a better job then. I hope I've made myself clear today. It's been very hectic. I hope that I've helped you to understand. I'd like you to hear from Mr. Ishman. He will give a perspective, and then I would be open to questions. I thank you for your time.
Madam Chair and members of the Judiciary, for the record, my name is William Dean Ishman. I'm a former New York City police officer, a current national board member and local president of the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice, better known as NABJA. I thank you today for this opportunity to speak. We support and applaud this good faith effort to meet the new level of deadly force expected by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's use of force policy. And for the benefit of our great state, Nevada, we urge you to pass AB 396. Today, more and more progressive states and police departments are also changing their laws. We are long overdue for this change, and that goes back to 2005. So we welcome this change to our laws. Realizing that police policy could easily change with the next sheriff, it makes AB 396 that much more necessary. Justice, unfortunately, is not always swift, but today we can make this life-saving change. Today, I speak not only on behalf of NABCHA, but with the cooperative support of several community-based organizations, such as the NAACP Las Vegas chapter, Roxanne McCoy, president, the East Vegas Christian Center, Pastor Troy Martinez, the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated, Las Vegas chapter, Dr. Sandra Mack, president, and the Fountain of Hope AME Church, Reverend Gregory K. McLeod, pastor. We strongly urge you to approve Assembly Bill 396 in an effort to restrict the use of deadly force by peace officers to effect the arrest of persons where no immediate and/or imminent threat of serious bodily harm or death exists for the officer or other. Also, be advised that this same and similar language is now a part of a majority of states' use of force laws, many introduced as of the horrific events of 2020. And by our addition of AB 396, this law would give some teeth to the new police policy and affords victims and families of victims a statewide legal redress. Again, we strongly urge the passage of AB 396, and I thank you for hearing me on this day. Any questions, comments?
Thank you
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Ishman, and thank you, Assemblymember Summers Armstrong, for your presentation. Are there questions from members of the committee? I think Senator Harris may have a question or two, and she is participating remotely today.
Thank you so much. Question relates to a bill that was just recently passed in the Assembly today. Do you, Ms. Armstrong, feel that the provisions related to use of force are in any way in conflict with Senate Bill 212?
Thank you, Senator Harris, for that question. I don't think they are in conflict. I think that there's an opportunity for complement of this language. In a Senate Bill 212, in section 3.7, there was an amendment that speaks to imminent. When you are speaking of dealing with folks who are a danger to themselves, and the behavior of the police when trying to apprehend or dealing with those folks in a situation where they are, where you are trying to extract them from a home or they have mental illness. And I think that the term imminent could very well be used in other instances as well. Just because a person is not mentally ill, but doesn't pose a threat, I think that the same standard of care, the same standard of patience and respect for life should be applied in any situation where we are trying to apprehend someone. That imminent should be our standard. That is asking our peace officers to take a 0.5-second pause before they act. Not that they cannot act. We don't want to tie their hands and say they cannot. But what we are asking for is a minuscule amount of time to assess whether or not the situation is imminent or not.
Thank you for answering the question. And could we also have Mr. Anthony weigh in on whether the bills conflict with each other?
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. I was just pulling up SB 212, the first reprint, and unfortunately, I'm not aware if that bill was further amended out of committee today, if that might have been the case in Assembly Judiciary.
It
So
was.
I'd have to look at that amendment and go to that on Nellis. So if I could just have a
Of
few
course.
moments. Thanks.
Of course. I think we have a couple of other questions. Senator Harris, did you have any other questions?
Oh, thank you, Chair Scheibel.
All right, thank you. We'll go to Vice Chair Canizaro.
Thank you, and thank you, Assemblywoman, for being here today. And I'm glad that Senator Harris asked the question, because I do think that one of the things is, and I know Mr. Anthony is taking a look at this, but in AB 396, it specifically in Section 1 references whether or not the homicide results from use of force by the peace officer in accordance with 171.1455. So it specifically references 171.1455. And then Section 2 amends 171.1455. In looking at even the mock-up that was presented for Senate Bill 212, it's substantially, the meat of this, at least in my opinion, aside from the reporting pieces, the meat of this bill resides in 171.1455. And implements de-escalation techniques, provides for where it is appropriate for that individual to use force, what sorts of things have to happen prior to that, talks about what is objectively reasonable under the circumstances to bring people under arrest, talks about the level of force used. It retains the probable cause has committed a felony or language, as opposed to 396, which makes it and includes the remainder of the language that talks about policies for individuals who are not armed, who may be under the age of 13, over 70, physically frail, mentally or physically disabled, pregnant, suffering from a mental or behavioral health issue, experiencing a medical emergency. And so I guess in my reading of it, we're either adopting language that is in 212 that talks about 171 and outlines the use of force, where it is appropriate, what sorts of techniques have to be employed, or we are confining it to what is currently in language saying it has to be and then adding the word imminent. And so to me, AB 396 refers directly to the meat of what is contained in Senate Bill 212. And so that's at least where, I don't know if maybe conflict is the right word, but they're doing two different things. And so I guess I think Senator Harris has a similar question to what I was looking at, and I wanted to just outline that so that we can also get some indication from legal about how that would all interplay together, because I see these as amending this 171.1455 one way and in another way, and I think Senator Harris did a lot of work to put in quite a few things into 171.1455, and this seems to do something that is very different.
Madam Chair, may I? I don't believe that these things have to be mutually exclusive. And I think that there is room for a combination. When the Senator's bill lists out all of these parameters, it doesn't mean that just because we are walking that we cannot chew gum at the same time. That there is still room in instances that may not be listed and laid out here, because no legislation can speak to every single situation. At the end of the day, after we have looked at whether or not someone is mentally ill, pregnant, over 70, that's objective, right? Whether they're under 13, we know from studies that oftentimes people believe Black children are older than they are. So a child could be 10, and from a distance, police or peace officers have to make a determination as to whether they believe that child. If someone doesn't tell them, they have to guess. The most important thing, I think, is that we give officers as many tools to save lives as possible. And we know that the human brain can process information very quickly. And regardless of all of these other things, at the end of the day, is whomever they are trying to deal with an imminent threat. And whether you adopt mine solely or wrap it into, I think that the word imminent is critical. And it's another tool, and it's a standard that LVMPD adopted. And I don't think that there's a problem if they are the gold standard, and they say that they are, that this is a standard that they can add in. It's not, doesn't have to be mutually exclusive.
No, and I definitely appreciate that, Assemblywoman, and I think what you're trying to accomplish with this bill is what we have been focused on, what we should be focused on, and I think you make excellent points that even came up in this committee when we were talking about, does a child look older than they are? Does somebody look not as frail when they might be, and how do you make those determinations? And obviously, we want to give law enforcement the tools to be able to comply with those things, but also to take those things into consideration, because it does play a factor into the use of force. I guess my issue is that in this bill, we're talking about doing two different things than what has already been outlined in 212, and that's a policy choice, I think, that folks have to make. And I don't know. I just wanted to kind of lay that out, because I don't think that anyone is trying to say we shouldn't be, holding officers accountable, that there shouldn't be a risk of harm if we're talking about the use of deadly force. And so I just think that if we've got two bills that are doing a little bit opposite things, then there's a policy choice that has to be made there. And that's where I wanted to just kind of outline that. But I think you've highlighted a lot of really good points that this body and the legislature as a whole should definitely take into consideration. But I don't know if Mr. Anthony wanted to weigh in just on some of the legal language in these two bills.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel and Majority Leader Cannizzaro. Yes, in looking at SB 212, as was currently voted out of Assembly Judiciary today based on the mock-up, it does look like both SB 212 and the provisions of AB 396 do both touch on NRS 171-1455. However, maybe in slightly different capacities. So I do believe from a legal standpoint, they could be read together if both bills were to pass in the current form. It'd be a policy choice for this body. SB 212 has the de-escalation components to it, and then 396 has the and component and the eminent. So they're touching different parts of that statutory scheme, but I feel like they could be codified in such a way, if both bills pass, they would not be in conflict, but could be codified together.
All right, thank you. Senator Orangel.
Thank you very much, Chair. And my question, thank you, Assemblywoman, for bringing the bill, and to the Chair of Assembly Judiciary for sponsoring the bill. Mr. Ishman, and I know you've worked on this issue for many years, and you've got the experience having been a police officer for so many years. I just wonder, if this bill were to pass, do you see anything that would hinder you as a law enforcement officer if you were back on the streets still patrolling? And if I may, if this bill doesn't pass, what kind of things do you think we might continue to see? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I do believe there is a difference in something that could be argued, and under the NRS 171 in line 2, if you look at, or should I say number 2, section 2, it does not mirror the section 1 piece where it speaks again about the use of deadly force. And so we had asked that it say, and especially for some lay folks and other folks, and or imminent, addresses and makes it understood that we're talking about in both lines, serious bodily harm and the use of deadly force. And so I believe that makes it a little bit stronger, and for the average folks, it makes it a little bit clearer that where this applies to both areas. Seems sketchy, and it seems like the number 2 leaves out the use of deadly force, and that's what we also want to be included. Does anyone see that in the section 1 and section 2? In the section 1, it reads seriously bodily harm or the use of deadly force. And it says, and poses imminent threat to seriously bodily harm only. And we want to make sure that that's covered in both scenarios, seriously bodily harm and the threat of deadly force.
Thank you, Mr. Ishman, and thank you, Chair.
Sure. Other questions from members of the committee? Senator Pickard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to digest because I didn't think about the changes we just made to 171-1455. And so let me just address them in order. When we're looking at section 1, this is proposing to delete the language regarding escaped prisoners that have been convicted of a felony, as well as suppressing a riot and in protecting against imminent threat to life, and replacing it with 171-1455. And then under this bill, since we weren't looking at the prior Senate bill, we're making this conjunctive that they have to involve a person who's committed a felony. And as I understand this, this is a recent felony, not an escaped convict, but someone who's convicted of felony which involves the infliction or threat of serious bodily harm and poses an imminent threat. So if you have, say, a child molester who has molested a number of children, they've been convicted, they've escaped from custody, they're a current risk, they're in a neighborhood, and you can't use a tactic that might, and I'm thinking in terms of a chase, if you've got a patrol vehicle who wants to move his patrol vehicle in the path of the individual, that's deadly force, you can't stop him. So as I read this, it really does become a handcuff to police in terms that they can't really stop the guy unless arguably he's pointing a gun at someone. Or, we're looking at something where they're posing an imminent threat to the officer or another person at that moment. And so someone running away doesn't fit that. And yet this person could be a serious threat to society if they get loose. And so I understand why we're going there, because I agree that the media has sensationalized a continuing problem that has remained hidden from view for a long time. But I don't want that pendulum to swing so far that we're actually endangering the public generally. So my question is this: how do we expect law enforcement to understand where the line is if it's not to let the person go?
Thank you, Senator Pickard, for the question. I'd like to address the first comment that you made, which is that media has sensationalized a situation. I have been a Black woman in America all my life. I'm almost 57 years old. And we have spoken among ourselves in our community. We have talked to the police. We have talked to our government officials. We have come before legislative bodies like this one. We have come before federal bodies. And we have been talking and fussing and telling people for generations that there is a problem. And now that we have camera phones and people are speaking these things publicly and they can be posted on social media, we're not trying to exaggerate something. It's not being, this is a problem that we've known is there. It now just happens to be in people's face because the pictures and the video is easily disseminated. When you say that law enforcement is handcuffed, I think that that is an exaggeration. Our law enforcement officers carry guns, they carry tasers. There are SWAT teams. They have the ability to have helicopters which fly over my neighborhood every night. They have extraction teams. They have militarized vehicles, combat darn near equipment. They have drones. There are numerous ways that they can apprehend. What this bill is saying is, if a person is in a situation where they are running away, we would appreciate it, no matter how horrible a person they are. Police are still there to be police and not to be the judge and the jury. And we want them to do what we want them to do, which is to take that person back into custody and not to become frustrated and believe that their only option is to use deadly force, because it really is not. They can use deadly force when needed if there's an imminent threat. If you have a child predator, and I love that that's always the example that's used. And I want you to know that in my community, and I don't know about yours, we have sexual predators who are out on, parole, all throughout my community, because they have to have some place to live. And just because they are sexual predators or they're out of jail, we don't just get to throw them in an internment camp. They have to live in neighborhoods. And when I look at the scope of who's in my neighborhood, they're there. And we keep an eye on them. And just because they have a record doesn't mean that they have that we can just shoot them in the back or use deadly force because they're afraid, right? If they've done their time and they're free, they have a right to exist. And if they're running and you're trying to apprehend them, does not mean that we just kill them because they are not the best of people, right? We still have a process by which people come before a judge, their peers, and are tried for whatever they do. So I think that it is not, it's a little disingenuous to believe that the only thing that we can do to apprehend people is to shoot them.
All right.
Or to use deadly force.
And so
sensationalize was the word that I could not get out of my mouth. I'm
Sure.
sorry.
Let me circle back and see if we can get back to the question. My point was that the media has sensationalized, or to use a different word, has spent a lot of time in the public space talking about something that has been hidden for a long time. Okay, that was my point. And it has caused a significant public reaction. As a result, the pendulum has swung. And as I look at what this bill is attempting to do, it moves the line for law enforcement in what they can and can't do. I think we can all agree to that. What I'm asking is, how does a law enforcement officer, based on what this bill, and particularly in conjunction with the Senate bill, how are they supposed to know what they can and cannot do? because the way I read this, they cannot use means of apprehension that can result in serious bodily harm or death, deadly force, for anyone except those that meet the standards under 171-1455. And there's some, I'm looking at Senate Bill 212 and how we've changed that. It's changed significantly, but if we were to adopt this bill, Section 2 makes the two components conjunctive, right? So they have to have committed a felony which involves the infliction or threat of serious bodily harm or use of deadly force and poses an imminent threat of seriously bodily harm to the peace officer or to others. Would not this then preclude apprehending somebody unless you could use non-lethal force only?
No.
Okay, explain that.
When Dylan Ruff shot 9 people at the church, he killed 9 people in cold blood. He ran, and the police were able to apprehend him, even though he had committed a felony of murder. They were still able to apprehend him and bring him in without killing him.
And
We
will
have a
that-
man.
Sorry.
We have a man who shot people in Colorado. The police were still able to apprehend him and bring him in without killing him. We had another man in Georgia who went to 4 different locations, if I'm not mistaken, and shot 8 people. And the police were still able to apprehend him and bring him in for justice before his peers, before a judge, as we are constitutionally entitled to have. So we have options, and when we tell our police and when we tell ourselves that the only way that we can apprehend bad people is to kill them, I think that we are, or that we have to inflict serious bodily harm, or we have to use deadly force. I think that we limit, and we limit ourselves when we do that, because, as I said earlier, our police are well-funded, well-trained, well-supplied. They have plenty of options, and they use them all the time. The question is, which modes of apprehension do they use, and on whom? Because many people seem to be able to be arrested and live to tell about it, but we seem to see only certain folks who end up being dead instead of arrested. And we want there to just be that simple point of time to think about what they are doing, to pause, to consider their options, and to bring people in alive to be judged by their peers, as we are constitutionally have a right to expect.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, other questions?
May I add something?
Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Ishman. Oh, no, we can't hear you right now. I'm not sure if you're muted on your end or there's a different technical difficulty.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted. I believe there was just a case yesterday or the day before where police made an apprehension where just what you're speaking about, where perhaps deadly force might have been used, but because of the climate now, they were able to apprehend this person without using deadly force. And I'd like to just take you back for a while for those who weren't around in 2005. When I started on this quest, it was a young man, Suave Lopez. Now, he was no good person at all, but he was handcuffed and escaped and was shot in the back escaping. Where I come from, they say he's either fleeing, it's either flight or fight. If you're handcuffed and running away, you're in a flight mode. You are no immediate threat to anyone at that point. And I do believe our federal law agrees with that. But to go ahead and leave this open, I'll give you my take on it, being a police officer and being John Q. Public and Black. It could possibly open up for those rogue cops, and that's what I'm really talking about. This could give them an unfair advantage. Like, well, I'll just let them escape and shoot them. Just let them run. And then I would question a lot of these times that this occurs, it is not with a description of a felon. Some of these things are real time, and now what you have is a fleeing suspect. Now, every cop responding may not have that information and understand that this just happened. So you don't have a fleeing felon, you have a fleeing suspect, and it may in fact even be the wrong person. The store was burglarized and some candy and other stuff was stolen, but they run. And then some just run because police are coming, but they may look like the description that came out. There's a problem there. And I agree that extra second to consider, whether this is the right thing to do ought to be taken. There's no doubt in my mind. And I don't want to make it easy for cops. I can't catch him. And some of the stereotypical statements, I can't catch that jackrabbit or whatever, So it's easy. Just shoot him. Let him escape and shoot him. I think that's something, and I'm just being forward thinking. I'm not saying that would happen, although I believe it could. But if we could close that, we'd never even have to face that anymore. It's just wrong. You don't shoot the fleeing suspect not posing an immediate threat of danger or harm to the police officer or others. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think Senator Hansen still had a question.
I do. You and I had a very interesting conversation in your office, and I guess it really boils down to we just see things like totally differently in this. So, I see a different world than you do. I mean, as far as how the police are treated and how the police are behaving, I think we have, in my mind, we have handcuffed is a mild word. We have restricted the ability of police to do their duty to such an extent that, in my opinion, cops nowadays are afraid to use any force, even when they legitimately should use it. And public safety's been compromised, and officer safety's been compromised. And, we're taking out of there the ability to deal with riots. We had a 29-year-old cop shot in the back of the head in a riot, and yet, should he have delayed another second or two before maybe he had an opportunity to return fire? I have a real hard time with these kind of bills because it's so easy for me sitting here in my little suit in a nice, safe environment to say, was it really imminent threat? Did the guy have mental illness? We ask an officer in the field to do so much and make such draconian decision-making in such tiny windows, and if they fail, they can get killed. Other people get harmed. So I guess the question in my mind is, it's almost, we've defunded the police. We fired officers or chiefs of police in big cities. And we've seen a huge spike in murders in those cities, predominantly of young black males. It's sort of like, is there any connection between the fact that we've removed law enforcement in those areas? So for me with the bill, it's just another one of these sort of anti-police bills. It's always the cops' fault. They're always the ones that are abusing force or doing that. So with a sincere apology, I just can't support this because to me, you actually end up harming the very people that you think you're going to protect. The more we defund the police, the more we make them so they're just almost paranoid to stand up and do what needs to be done in some circumstances, the more people are harmed that they're there to protect. So I'm sorry, I just, this whole thing just strikes me as wrong. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. So there were a lot of comments in there, and there, I think there was a question buried in there that was not relevant to the bill. So I will leave it up to the presenters. If you want to respond to the comments and or answer the question, absolutely, you have the floor to do so. And if you choose to decline, then we will simply move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Hansen. And I understand that this is a difficult conundrum that we find ourselves in. And I think that one of the things that we know about the history of this country, at least I do, is that there is never a simple solution. Oftentimes people talk about the crime and in inner cities and young black men dying and the gun violence in those cities, and they don't do the backtrack. The problems that we see in Chicago, for instance, didn't happen yesterday, day before, 5 years ago. Those issues go back 50 years or so, and they have to do with gang violence that didn't even start in the black community. And if you do a little reading, you'd be surprised how that evolved. My husband and his family are from Chicago, and it's a hell of a tale how that happened. And what is happening, the defunding, the lack of jobs, the lack of opportunity, the segregation, that's what feeds into a lot of this. So we can't, and for someone to say, well, we've defunded the police, which really is not true if you look at the numbers of dollars that go into police, you have to study over a significant amount of time, at least to get some numbers straight, to even determine whether or not crime has gone up in those communities. You just can't go by 2 or 3 months. You really have to do some study in order for it to be legitimate. We don't put out any studies here unless something is studied for 2 years, and then we can know because we can track the spikes, the ups and downs. We are really not trying to handcuff the police. We really are not. This bill is not that. This bill is really a 5/10 of a second to think about what they're about to do. I have friends who are law enforcement, and I would never want to put them in harm's way. But many of them are black, and they have a different perspective, and they act a different way when they're doing what they're doing because they see themselves. And when we are asking our police to be concerned, it's not that we don't want them. We know that we need the police in our communities. But we also know that we have a real history, and we just want our police to treat every community with the same consideration. And I gave you several instances of people who we know committed murder that ran, that left, and were apprehended, and they're alive. And it's not because the police were handcuffed or didn't have a means to capture them, but in their minds, they chose a different path on how they were going to go about apprehending. And we're hoping that this legislation will just make it a part of training, make it a part of the mindset that you think before you act. And that's all that we want. And I thank you, ma'am, for the time. And we close.
And I'm not sure if Mr. Ishman wanted to weigh in as well. Again, up to you.
Yes, Madam Chair. I would just ask a question now so that I'm clear. Again, I'm not an attorney, but someone has said to me that if we take out the or, which was asked, and just left the and, that covered both section 1 and 2. Is that actually what we're saying? Because that was my concern, that it applied to both and not just 1 and not 2. I say that correctly? I'm sorry.
Can you answer that, Mr. Anthony?
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. The bill is, as currently written, Mr. Ishman, you're correct. It's deleting the or and adding the and, so that subsections 1 and 2 would be read conjunctively, meaning that you would have to have both the commission of a felony and possess an imminent threat of harm, of serious bodily harm to the peace officer or others. So as currently written under the bill, it would be an and, it would require both subsection 1 and 2 to be read conjunctively.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. So, okay, I also have a question about this bill, and likewise, I appreciate you sitting in the hot seat and taking these questions. And I have been looking for another part of the NRS, or maybe I am just misreading this, but the way that I reason through the replacement of or with and, it requires that the person has already, that the police officer has probable cause to believe. So the person has already been arrested or a warrant's been issued, and the person's already committed not just a felony, but a violent felony before they can use deadly force at all. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, I just need a second, please. Madam Chair, Chandra Summers Armstrong, for the record, I am only reading what is here, and I don't know all of 171.1455 by heart. I can tell you that we took out what is deleted is what was previously 2 and 3. And what is remaining is just the apprehension portion of it. So no matter what, for whatever reason a person is being apprehended, that these things need to be applied. That's my reading. I could be wrong. I think Chair Yeager is, hello, he's here. And if I'm incorrect, I'm sure he can correct that for me. But my reading is that this is any escape, no matter what the person is accused of, that any escape would have this procedure of whether or not they are an imminent threat to someone.
So let me put a finer point on it, because when we remove the other language about justifiable homicides in Section 1, and we restrict, Section 2 is just 171.1455, which just talks about escape. Are we leaving open the situation when an officer responds to a dynamic scene and somebody is threatening to kill somebody else, but they haven't done it yet? If the officers cannot prevent that person from killing their victim without using deadly force, they would have to wait until that person who was threatening to kill someone else had committed a felony, causing substantial bodily harm, or the infliction of a serious threat of force, before they would be justified in utilizing deadly force to stop that person.
Absolutely not. The moment that, so a similar example was used when we were in the assembly. If someone comes into this building and they take one of us, put their arm around my neck, they don't like me, I am now under threat of serious bodily harm or death. The police can use whatever means they need at that time. They've had 0.5 seconds or 5 milliseconds or whatever to assess. They see that the person is in the act of committing a felony, and they can see that I am in danger.
But the language doesn't say in the act of committing a felony. It says has committed a felony.
And poses an imminent threat of serious bodily harm to a peace officer or other person.
But the felony hasn't been committed at this point in time. Let me give you another example.
Okay.
And I'll use an example that if one person, person A points a gun at person B, I think that is assault with a deadly weapon. I have seen, but that is not necessarily the infliction or threat of serious bodily harm or the use of deadly force. That has to go through a process to determine probable cause of whether or not that act that was committed of pointing a gun at another person is assault with a deadly weapon. And every day in Nevada, justices of the peace throw out cases where a person points a gun at another person and says, there is no probable cause here to believe that a felony has been committed. I am not granting a bind over in this case. So if an officer arrives on that scene, they cannot, in good conscience, be assured that there's probable cause to believe that a felony has been committed, even as they watch somebody point a gun at somebody else. And I don't see in this bill where they are allowed to utilize deadly force to stop that person from committing what is definitely a felony, which is pulling the trigger. Pulling the trigger is going to be a felony most days of the week. But until that happens, a felony's not been committed by probable cause. And that's my concern, is that there are going to be instances where subsection 2 applies and subsection 1 does not.
Madam
And I see Mr. Ishman also wants to respond, so I don't know who wants to go first.
Yes, if I may. Under Tennessee versus Garner, it is federal law that you do not, if there is an instance where someone is pointing a weapon, that you can protect yourself and or others, and you reasonably believe that they pose an imminent threat of death or danger. So that is a federal mandate. That's under Tennessee versus Garner. And that's in New York. That's why you don't shoot fleeing suspects, because they honor Tennessee versus Garner in its entirety. So I just wanted to bring that to light. And yes, you were talking about violent felonies, and that is the way it reads. It even reads that way in the police policy. The point, and maybe it's irrelevant at this point, but my point was, like I said, if someone gets a radio call and they're responding, you don't have any history on this person. You're chasing a suspect and not a felon. And I'm not trying to belabor anything. I'm just bringing that up. Hopefully that'll just sink in. And thanks again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chandra Summers Armstrong for the record. I understand the example that you are giving, but in any situation where there is an imminent threat of bodily harm and someone's life is at stake, of course we expect the police to do what they can. But when someone is an imminent threat, I think we know what the difference is. If someone is pointing a gun at someone, that's an imminent threat. I think even the bill that Senator Harris brought, she speaks about imminent threats. The bill went through, if a person's going to commit suicide and they're not threatening someone else, we understand what an imminent threat is. And I think that when we try to dissect this as if a human brain cannot have two consecutive thoughts to make a decision, we are pretending like we're not rational people. We are rational people. If I'm a police officer and you are in a situation where someone is pointing a gun at you, immediately you are in imminent danger and I'm going to try and protect your life, period.
So I agree philosophically and conceptually. And part of our job at the legislature is to dissect those situations and spell out for law enforcement when they are allowed to use that deadly force and when they are not allowed to use that deadly force. And the way that this bill reads, they are not allowed to use that deadly force unless the person they're about to use the deadly force against has already committed a felony which involves the infliction or threat of serious bodily harm or the use of deadly force, and the officer has probable cause to believe that they have committed that felony. So I understand that in concept, we can agree on what we want an officer to do, but the law has to reflect that consensus. And I don't think this law or this bill reflects that consensus, because I believe, and maybe legal could also correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a prerequisite that the officer have probable cause to believe that the person they're about to use deadly force against has already committed a felony involving the infliction of threat or threat of serious bodily harm or the use of deadly force.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. Yes, I believe your interpretation of this bill is correct. I'd also like to point out, though, that there are other statutes at play that aren't necessarily in this bill. For instance, 200.120 is justifiable homicide by any person, and that's the killing of a human being in self-defense or in defense of an occupied habitation, motor vehicle, or against another person. So as written in this bill specifically deals with use of force by a peace officer when preventing escape. So I believe this bill is fairly narrowly tailored to that end.
Thank you. And I think that I think it's bad policy to start trying to apply the standards for justifiable homicide that apply to everybody to peace officers. There's a reason that we separate those statutes and we spell it out for peace officers, because we do hold them to a different standard. I argue that we hold them to a higher standard, and we should hold them to a higher standard. And this bill not only affects 171.1455 when a suspect is fleeing, but also 200.140, which is the justifiable homicide by a peace officer, and we've removed Section D in protecting against an imminent threat to the life of a person. Yes,
sorry. Is that a
show
question?
me what I'm missing that allows a police officer to utilize. I mean, walk me through it. You're a police officer, you utilize deadly force, you kill somebody who's not yet committed a felony, but you do it because you're preventing him or her from taking somebody else's life, and you have to utilize this statute to justify your actions. Or the NRS at all. How do you justify that with this language?
Madam Chair, you're asking me to play an attorney, and I'm not one. I may not have an answer for your question. I can only present to you the language that is put before you today. You all will have to determine among yourselves whether or not there's any piece of this that you think that you can resurrect. You will have to look to see if there's a way that and I would ask that you look to see if there's a way for some of this, especially the imminent portion of it, even if you get rid of the and leave the or, that could stay. I still think that there is space and necessity for there to be concurrent thought before deadly force is used. And I understand that we are here to legislate and things are supposed to be clear, but we're also told that we have to give people space in legislation to use good judgment. And part of this is to allow the function of good judgment, that police officers are not just thinking about one thing when they are doing their job, but that they are also challenged and charged with using more than one thought process when they pull the trigger. They have different options that they can use, and those options are many and well-funded and well-trained and well-cataloged. And I just think that this is reasonable under the circumstances.
I appreciate your response, and I do appreciate you engaging in the conversation. It's tough, but it's necessary. So if there aren't any, yes, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I was still trying to wrap my head around just the and part. And if, in my opinion, the and covers both areas, then I think this is something that I could possibly live with, as long as it included and it has it in there. My biggest concern was the imminent threat of danger, and that needs to be a controlling factor in the equation. And if that is the case and both areas are covered, then I could live with this. And we need something in place right now, and we could live to fight about this another day. But imminent threat language has to be in there. We do not have any imminent threat in our laws right now. And so that needs to be in our laws. And that was really the thing that drove me all along.
Thank you for that, and I think that does make sense. With that, we will move on to testimony, and we will start with testimony in support of AB 396. I see we have some people in the room to give testimony. You'll be able to go first, and you will have 2 minutes each.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. John Pure for the record from the Clark County Public Defender's Office. We'd like to thank Assemblywoman Chandra Summers Armstrong for bringing this bill forward. We think the key word in here, imminent, is important, and we think it's necessary. There were some comments made about the pendulum swinging. Perhaps the pendulum needed to swing because the way we were doing things wrong in the past wasn't working. We trust civilian control over our military. Perhaps it's time for civilians to exercise some more control over our police so that our society does function in a safer, more just way. And I think this bill goes a little bit towards that. Not too far, but enough. And so we're grateful that she's bringing this bill and urge this committee to pass it.
Good afternoon, Kendra Birchie with the Washoe County Public Defender's Office. Thank you, Chair Scheibel and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I also want to thank the Assemblywoman for bringing this important bill forward. We do believe that this is an extension of the bills that were passed over the special session, which were from the community, which were demanding some additional support and accountability that several members of both bodies indicated that they would be bringing forward. So we do really appreciate this bill. I just want to clarify a few things first. With respect to Section 1, this bill does not eliminate any defenses that a peace officer would have if there were to proceed to trial. I believe that Mr. Anthony mentioned some of them, but also things like self-defense. So those would not be hampered by this bill. So we just wanted to make sure that's on the record. Then with respect to Section 2, first I want to turn to Senator Pickard's question. I believe that there might be some confusion between the use of deadly force versus the use of a deadly weapon. That is the distinction for the car, and so actually you can use the car to ram and blockade using those police methods to effectuate a DUI arrest. So I just want to make sure that's clear on the record that those procedures are not hindered by this bill as well. We do agree that the term imminent is extremely important. and I just pulled up Metro's use of force policy because thankfully it is online while we were engaged in this discussion. Not only do they have the word imminent threat specifically when trying to prevent an effectuate arrest from someone who's trying to escape, they also include the violent felony. I believe that was discussed as well in the discussion with Senator Scheibel, so I want to make sure that's clear on the record. And so we do believe that is important because at this point, someone, if they haven't been arrested, they're still presumed innocent under the eyes of the law. And we are now talking about whether or not we're giving police officers the right to potentially kill and take away a life. And so that's why I believe that the use of imminent is necessary to ensure those protections are in place to protect our community members. Thank you.
All right, I think that is everybody we have in the room in support of AB 396. So we will go to the phones, please, Mr. Kyle.
Thank you so much, Chair Scheibel. To testify in support on Assembly Bill 396, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to testify in support on Assembly Bill 396, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 130, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders. That's CHRISTINE SAUNDERS, and I'm the Policy Director with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, here in support of AB 396. First, we also want to profusely thank the Assemblywoman for presenting this very important bill today. At Plan, we work to structurally transform Nevada's criminal justice system by organizing with people who have direct experience with mass incarceration and their families. This body promised some real criminal justice reform this session, and AB 396 is a bill that communities who are disproportionately impacted by police violence want you to pass. Do right by the community today and move this bill forward. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 080, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Hi, Jim Hoffman, Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice. NACJ supports AB 396. One of the bill's presenters mentioned Suave Lopez, and I wanted to expand on that because I think it's a very good argument in favor of passing this bill. Suave was a 17-year-old who was accused of murder in 2006. He was arrested by police in Las Vegas, who handcuffed him and searched him, and then left him standing up against the police car while they did the arrest paperwork. He took that opportunity to run, and so the police shot him in the back multiple times and killed him. They had just searched him, so they knew for a fact that he did not have a weapon and was not an imminent danger, but they chose to shoot him in the back anyway. And I don't think that's the kind of policing we want. I know a lot of people have this image of the police officer as a sheriff from a Western movie, riding in with his white hat and shining star to save the day. And that's a great ideal, and I think we should strive for that. But that sheriff, John Wayne, he never shoots the bad guy in the back while he's running away, right? That's something that the black hats do. We want our police to be John Wayne, not Lee Van Cleef. So we need our legal structure to reflect that expectation. We need it to be illegal for police to shoot a fleeing, unarmed teenager in the back. Passing AB 396 is the way to do that, and so we urge the committee to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. And for those of you that have recently joined our meeting this afternoon, we are currently on support testimony for Assembly Bill 396. If you've just joined and would like to provide support testimony at this time, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 695. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is Holly Wellborn, Policy Director for the ACLU of Nevada. Always difficult to follow, Jim Hoffman. Thank you for that excellent testimony. I have a few points to make, so forgive me as I shuffle through a few different documents that I'm looking at. But let's start with the purpose here. Let's talk about some numbers. Between 2005 and 2020, 121 officers had been arrested for murder or manslaughter. Only 44 were convicted, often of a lesser charge, and approximately only 30% of those cases involved a victim who was armed. So that means a person who was exhibiting the same amount of force that was inflicted upon them that led to their death. What this bill does is it provides that accountability that we have been asking for in coalition, community advocates have been asking for. When we look at the justifiable homicide statute, there are a variety of circumstances that are laid out that simply should not be the public policy of the state. The public policy of the state should be to impose a high standard on law enforcement, the highest standard possible to prevent injury and death at the hands of state actors. Just as Jim Hoffman said, we need to hold law enforcement to as high a standard as possible. Early in the negotiations on a Senate Bill 212, we had talked about this provision, and the Justice Reform and Accountability Alliance had proposed language that stated a peace officer may use deadly force only if there is probable cause to believe that the individual poses an imminent threat of death to the peace officer or to others. Perhaps language like that could help clarify what we are talking about in Section 2. But I think what is operative here is at what point are these homicides justifiable, and that we cannot lose sight of that. For these reasons, we encourage your support and encourage you to move this bill forward. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 656. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and committee. My name is Will Pregman, representing Battleborn Progress, WILLP as in Peter, REGMAN. We rise in strong support of AB 396. We commend Sandra Summers Armstrong for bringing this bill forward today to tighten the protocols for the use of force by law enforcement officers. It's sadly become too common that unnecessary and unjustifiable violence is used by some officers as a tactic to instill fear rather than suppress a legitimate threat to public safety. Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong has worked hard on this bill to stipulate that there must be an imminent threat to public safety before deadly force is used. It should not be so much to ask that our police officers who are tasked with protecting a community not simply kill or maim someone as a first resort. As we as a country reckoned with the Derek Chauvin trial over the murder of George Floyd, it's time for a serious conversation about use of force policy. Chauvin was not the first and not the only officer to use inappropriate force that resulted in killing someone supposedly in their control or custody. It's an imperative that we stop cases like this. Maybe 396 is a step towards doing that. We thank Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong for bringing this bill, and we ask that the committee please support it. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 037. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Tanya Brown, TONJABROWN, advocates for the inmates and the innocent. We would like to thank Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong for bringing this very important bill forward. We strongly support AB 396. We would just like to echo the previous comments and callers that have made their comments. To simply do nothing on this bill is allowing what is going on to continue, and that is simply not right. People need to be held accountable. They need people who are not committing crimes, who are not holding a weapon, who really, and I don't believe officers in those particular cases are really fearing for their safety, for their lives, should allow somebody to be shot and killed, particularly if they are handcuffed, running away, and they pose no threat to anyone. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 846. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
My name is Adrian Lowry, Adrian Lowry. We've seen an absolutely tragic amount of community members, family members, and neighbors killed in the state. This bill's focused on people who are fleeing and preventing them from being killed while they're running away. It seems unreasonable to demand the bill address the scenario of somebody taking a hostage and pointing a gun at somebody. As somebody said after asked, I'm not sure, said this is narrowly focused on a person who is fleeing. So I'm asking you to support AB 396 because it will save lives. And we've seen a lot of people, at least here in the north, killed while fleeing the police. And thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits, 556. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Anne Marie Grant, ANNEMARIE GRANT, sister of Thomas Purdy, murdered by Reno Police and Washoe County Sheriff's Office during a mental health crisis. Thank you, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, for bringing AB 396 forward. This bill is about preserving the sanctity of life, not putting handcuffs on law enforcement. We think of deadly force as just as shooting, but we know from the trial of Derek Chauvin that hobble restraints are a higher level of force. When my brother was killed by police, he was a threat to no one. Perhaps if this bill was in place in 2015, my brother would be alive. Micaiah Lee, a young 18-year-old African-American teenager in crisis, drove away from police and was shot and killed by them immediately when he was not a threat, an imminent threat to any officer at the time. His vehicle was completely disabled. We can't have police being judge, jury, and execution, and we have a justice system for a reason. Officer Shay Michelanis was shot, but innocent Jorge Gomez paid for the hysteria that night that ran through LVMPD. The pendulum needed to swing long ago. The community is speaking. Please hear them and act. Don't take your personal feelings about things. You need to listen to the community and do what they want. Soraya Shepard would be alive. 5-year-old Soraya Shepard would be alive had AB 396 been in effect on 4/28/21. When RPD and SPD chased a man wanted on just warrants. He ran a red light. They have a helicopter in Washoe County. We have plate readers. That little girl should be alive. Her family is devastated. Police kill innocent civilians through reckless chases, chasing people every year, hundreds and hundreds. I urge you to go to fatalencounters.org and search by vehicle deaths. Please support this bill. It is necessary and needed. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. And if you've recently joined the meeting this afternoon, we are currently on support testimony for Assembly Bill 396. If you have recently joined or would like to provide support testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 766. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Hi, yes, my name is Matthew Wilkie, MATTHEWWILKIE. Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, for bringing this bill forward. And thank you so much, Anne Marie Grant, for always being there to testify all the time. Appreciate you and everything you do for the community. I definitely urge your support on this bill. It is not handcuffing the police. This is bringing accountability forward and making everything more transparent and making these criminals, as some senators there are stating today, hold them accountable. This bill is not a free giveaway, making things easy for these criminals, as some of these senators have brought forth. So please support this bill, and we support Anne Marie Grant, her brother, and Susan, and all the other families going forward who this bill could support, and hopefully going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, caller. And with that, Chair Scheibel, there are no more callers to provide support testimony at this time.
Thank you so much. Just to reiterate, we have taken all of the callers who were in the queue to testify in support of AB 396. So now we will move to people testifying in opposition to AB 396. I don't see anybody in the room to give such testimony, so we will go directly to the phone lines, please, Mr. Kyle.
Thank you so much, Chair Scheibel. To testify in opposition on Assembly Bill 396, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to testify in opposition on Assembly Bill 396, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 196, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I'm Eric Spratley, S-P-R-A-T-L-E-Y, the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association, here in opposition to one single word of AB 396, and that is in Section 2.1, line 27. That word is "and." This requires, number 1, and number 2, before an officer may use deadly force. I had a very lengthy, granular example to try yet again to get that point across, but this committee gets it. You truly understand the critical error with the word "and" in this bill. So we will submit to your common sense here. Thank you, Chair Scheibel.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 389. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel, Leader Canizaro, and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Jennifer Noble, Jennifer-Noble, and I am testifying today on behalf of the Nevada District Attorneys Association in opposition to AB 396. We certainly appreciate the intent of the bill, and we do not object to the concept that an imminent threat should be in play where an officer uses potentially deadly force. Our opposition is not an effort to limit police accountability, but is instead based upon the plain meaning rule of statutory interpretation that's applied by our court. There is simply a disconnect between the expressed intent of the presenters on this bill and its actual language. As Mr. Spratley conveyed, our primary concern is tied to the question, I think first raised by Senator Pickard, I think answered by Mr. Anthony initially, regarding Section 2, Sub 1 and 2, wherein the use of the word "and" is used conjunctively, not disjunctively, and it appears to prevent an officer from appropriately reacting to an imminent threat of serious bodily harm if the person has not committed a felony that falls within the narrow parameters of Section 2, Sub 1. Police officers should be able to defend themselves and others whenever there is an imminent threat of bodily harm, regardless of the class of crime that may have brought them to the scene. I think we may all agree about that, but that's not how this bill reads. As it reads right now, the word "and" makes the bill inconsistent with the right of self-defense applicable under NRS Chapter 200. It appears to apply a reduced or altered right of self-defense. We suggested earlier reference to Chapter 200 might assist this bill, but I don't believe that suggestion was adopted. And for the reasons I've just stated, we are in opposition to the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 928. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Hi, my name is Deontay Swartzeger, DIANTESWARTZFAGER. Thank you for taking my call. I'm actually calling in to support it. It didn't put me in queue, so if I would be allowed to just use a brief second to show my support, and then you can move on with the oppositions.
Yes, that's fine if the record will please reflect that this testimony will be in support. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you for bringing this bill to the table, and I would like to strongly urge you from myself and the people in our community and our state to pass this bill. This bill is not only very important, but very valuable to the step of change that our community is taking towards the Police Use of Force Act. Okay, we're not trying to handcuff the police. No one is going to sit here and scream that we don't need the police, but we are going to sit here and scream that we need some type of language with our legislative that stops the injustices, not just prolongs them, not just puts it off until something else happens and then it comes back. We need language that's in there constantly improving day by day, not just sitting there growing old. We have to make amendments 10 years later. We want this bill to grow and be approved, and we can argue about the specifics later, but at the end of the day, it comes down to one thing: is this person going to hurt me or somebody else right this second? If not, there's no need to use your weapon. You have tasers, you have training, they took that oath and took on the badge to know what they were going to endure and the challenges they're going to take every day. And I support them for that. Go ahead, take those challenges, because I didn't. But I am asking that you look at the community as one person, as every person is not different, and that you go onto a scene of a crime or a possible crime or emotional breakdown with your open mind and just protect our community, please. And thank you again, and please approve this bill.
Thank you, caller. And for those of you that have recently joined, we are currently on opposition testimony for Assembly Bill 396. If you have recently joined and would like to provide opposition testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 887. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel, Leader Canizaro, and honorable members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My name is Corey Solferino, C-O-R-E-Y, S as in Sam, O-L, F as in Frank, E-R-I-N-O, and I have the pleasure of representing the Washoe County Sheriff's Office. We are opposed to AB 396 because it compromises public and officer safety. In accordance with Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs and Nevada District Attorneys Association concerns, the use of deadly force is an officer's last option, period. No officer ever wants to take a life. Those that are forced to take a life must forever live with the consequences of those actions. Some never recover from that and are forced to leave a job of stewardship that they love. Federal case law governs use of deadly force and has specific criteria that must be met to pursue. There is no freelancing in use of deadly force encounters. In most instances, officers only have a fraction of a second to make a life or death decision. Our officers are well equipped, but there is not one magic tool that makes every use of force encounter successful. Some of the examples used in this bill presentation are simply not factually sound and not in line with our training philosophy or our performance in the field. And study after study, assaults on law enforcement have gone up exponentially, with officers hesitant to use lawful force when legally justified to do so. Use of body-worn cameras deployed in the field have further limited the use of force cases and give us an excellent training tool to evaluate, train, and hold our law enforcement accountable for their actions in the field. I just had the pleasure of defending my thesis and earning a Master's of Science in Criminology at the University of Louisville and the consequences of negative effect responses on police legitimacy. I have a ton of resources, peer-reviewed articles, and case studies available to share with the committee on use of force, strain theory, and the role it plays in officer and citizen encounters. The Washoe County Sheriff's Office is not perfect, but it is committed to the community it serves. We listen to our stakeholders and deploy resources where they are most effective and efficient to earn the respect of our citizenry and further enhance our social efficacy with the public we serve. Our law enforcement coalition is committed to meaningful criminal justice reform and using evidence-based practices to guide strong policy decisions. We support this wholeheartedly. And we cannot get behind policy decisions that further harm public safety and the law enforcement officers in the field that put their lives on the line day in and day out. I do thank you, Chair, for this opportunity to speak before you today and encourage your opposition to AB 396. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 456. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee. My name is A.J. Delap. That's the last name phonetically David Easy Lincoln Adam Paul of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. We are in opposition to AB 396 for many of the reasons spoken of prior in opposition. On behalf of Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, we are pleased that much of our current use of force policies have been implemented in this session. However, we feel that this one provides more confusion than it does clarity. I've spoken with several attorneys throughout the day trying to wrap my mind around what's trying to be accomplished and what the legislative intent will tell us to do in the future. And even through this committee, I believe the waters have become more muddy than clear on how it's to be implemented properly. As police officers, we have a duty to protect, as well as ourselves and the family and the communities that we live in. And as I think through this potential impact of legislation, as a 24-year police veteran, I'm not sure how to adequately train it or apply it to day-to-day police operations involving pursuits where persons who have, per the legislation, have probable cause to have committed a felony involving serious bodily injury or threat. The scenarios run through my mind through and through, and although I believe I may have imminent threat, I'm not sure what the legislative intent is, and because of that, we can't support this measure as written. For those reasons, we are in opposition, and we urge this measure not to pass. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. And with that, Chair Scheibel, there are no more callers to provide opposition testimony at this time.
All right, thank you very much. So again, to clarify for the record, we have taken testimony from everybody who called in opposition. So we will now move to neutral testimony on AB 396. I don't see anybody in the room to give testimony, so we will go directly to the phones, please. Mr. Kyle.
Thank you so much, Chair. To testify in the neutral standing on Assembly Bill 396, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Once again, to testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 396, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 647. Please press star 6 to unmute yourself. Thank you, caller, and slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Thank you. My name's Nathaniel Phillips, Nathanniel, Phillips, Phillipps. And I actually meant to speak in support of this bill. Could that be reflected on the record, please?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. I'm calling with the Mass Liberation Organization or Project as well to thank the Assemblywoman for presenting this bill and for heeding calls from community members to do something vital and important to address police accountability and police brutality. I hope I could respond to just a couple of things and then offer me something that hasn't been said. One of the senators said that he must be living in a different world when it comes to the description of police accountability and police brutality. And I think he's accurate in that statement, because in certain communities that are over-policed, in Black and brown communities, oftentimes the police are there as an occupying force and as an occupying presence. We know from other legislation that's been proposed during this session that, for instance, police over-police in poor zip codes and zip codes where there are predominantly Black residents for the enforcement of traffic warrants in this city. We already have evidence that speaks to over-policing of certain communities. Another senator spoke about how this bill would handcuff police forces, and I think it's very important that we reject categorically that assertion and the spirit of what the senator is saying. It's quite ironic and quite disrespectful to use that language as well, especially when this legislation is championed and supported by people who have historically been subject to police oppression. So in case we didn't know, the people most likely exposed to deadly and excessive force are usually already disenfranchised and marginalized by society. In fact, police brutality and police killing, shooting, is a leading cause of death for young people, and particularly Black and young people of color. 1 in 1,000 Black men are killed by police. So it's actually a public health crisis that legislation like this actually addresses and seeks to prevent. And just lastly, because I know I'm out of time, I would urge this committee to take a different route than seeming to care more about the power to kill and end people's lives in this state than to preserve and protect them. This body has not heard the bill on the death penalty, and now we see quite hearty and spirited criticism by the chair and vice chair when it comes to common sense legislation that would save people's lives and go a long way to fighting for eliminating systemic racism in police forces and in our community. Police are violence workers, and we need to remember that. So thank you so much for your time, and I again urge your strong support of this bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you, caller. And if you've recently joined us this afternoon or have missed previous announcements, we are currently on neutral testimony for Assembly Bill 396. If you'd like to provide neutral testimony at this time, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. And Chair Scheibel, at this time, there are no callers to provide neutral testimony.
All right, thank you very much. That concludes testimony on AB 396. I will turn it back over to our presenters for closing comments.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel and committee. And I thank you all for your time and attention to this issue. I understand that it is painful and somewhat contentious, and that it's not to everyone's liking. But I think, as I said to one of my cohort a week or so ago, that it is well past time that we have a harsh and frank discussion about criminal justice reform and policing and its true effect on the communities who are at risk in this equation. I would like to just also point out a couple of things. You know, last year, this body prohibited police from using chokeholds, but they can be used if a policeman's life is in imminent danger. There are laws that equate to self-defense, and I don't think that we can look at one area of the law in isolation and not realize that any time someone is accused of something, they are looking at the law as a whole and different chapters of the law, as the attorney here mentioned earlier, when it comes to self-defense would also apply. So we can't just look at one thing. There are various areas that have to be read together in order to come up with a complete picture. So these statutes need to be read in conjunction. Mr. Ishman, another caller, mentioned Mr. Suave Lopez. And this bill is really about a fleeing person, a fleeing felon. It's narrow and in its application. And I think that we need to keep that in mind and recognize how it is being, what it's being written for and its purpose. I also want to offer that, you know, it would not be my preference, but I'm trying to be a reasonable person, and I want there to be some movement. So I would consider taking out the "and" in this bill, but I believe that the imminent is absolutely critical. We need to have a standard that holds those who are in public safety, our peace officers, to a high standard. It is not unreasonable to do so. They benefit from our respect. They benefit from our tax dollars. They benefit from our laws. And I think that that is not a high standard to ask them to use imminent as a standard before they use this type of force. I thank you all for your time. I'm hopeful that if this law, if this legislation is accepted and applied by those who are in positions of authority, that it can better bridge trust between communities, Black communities and other communities of color with the police. We have not had historically the best of relationships, but we all have to live together. And if we are trying to bridge gaps, there has to be a concession on all sides and admittance of our roles in all of this on all sides. And I believe that this is a situation where there is room for trust building, and I think that imminent is a fair enough bridge to build. So I thank you for your time today in this hearing. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. We also appreciate you taking the time out of what is a busy day, we know, to be here, to answer our questions, to engage in this conversation with us. And we appreciate your dedication to this issue. And I share your hope that we will make some forward movement, maybe with some further conversations. To that end, the hearing is now closed on AB 396. We are going to go into recess. It is 4:30 p.m. right now. What I will do, we'll be in recess until the call of the chair. In order to give you some ability to plan your lives, I will promise you that we will not reconvene before 5:30, so you have at least an hour. I'm looking at the chair of Assembly Judiciary. I don't know if you guys are going to go back into session, but around 5:30, I'll take a look at what other committees are in session, and where my members are and where those of you who have work sessions coming up are, and I will try to be as communicative as possible to get everybody back here sometime after 5:30 for the continued work session. And I thank you all for being here. We're in recess.